natural, built-in respect for authority. When we see the flashing red and blue lights in our rear-view mirror, our first instinct is to pull over. We assume that the person behind those lights is there to protect us, to serve us, or at the very least, to give us a ticket. We trust the uniform. We trust the badge. But on the long, lonely stretches of the American highway, trust is a very dangerous thing to have. Welcome to the start of a 1-hour journey into the darkest side of the open road. Over the next 60 minutes, we are going to explore the terrifying reality of the people who hunt on the asphalt. The predators who use our own trust and our own laws against us. This is Chapter 1, The Fake Cruiser. It was a Tuesday night in the high desert of Arizona. 24-year-old Sarah was driving a silver sedan, moving house from Texas to California. She had been on the road for 14 hours straight. Her car was packed to the roof with boxes, clothes, and her entire life. The stretch of Interstate 10 she was on was legendary for its isolation. There were no streetlights, no gas stations for 50 miles. And the only thing visible in her headlights was the endless, shimmering heat haze rising from the black asphalt. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah noticed a pair of headlights appearing in her rear-view mirror. They were far away at first, just 2 tiny dots in the darkness. But within minutes, the vehicle was right on her bumper. Suddenly, the night was filled with a blinding, strobe-like flash of lights, red and blue. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She checked her speedometer. She was doing 65 in a 65 zone. She hadn't missed a turn signal. But she didn't want any trouble. She slowed down and pulled her car onto the narrow gravel shoulder of the highway. The police cruiser pulled in behind her. It didn't look like a standard state trooper vehicle. It was a dark, older model SUV, completely blacked out. The lights on the roof were small, and the siren was silent. Sarah rolled down her window just an inch, her hands shaking as she searched for her driver's license. The officer stepped out of the SUV. He was tall, wearing a dark blue uniform and a heavy tactical vest. He had a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. In the dim glow of his flashing lights, Sarah couldn't see his face. He walked slowly toward her car, but he didn't walk to the driver's side window. He walked to the back of her car. Sarah watched him in her side mirror. He stood there for a long time, looking at her Texas license plates. Then he leaned down and put his hand on her trunk, as if he was checking if it was locked. Finally, he walked up to her window. He didn't say, "Good evening, ma'am." He didn't ask for her license. He leaned down, his face still hidden in the shadows of his hat, and whispered, "You shouldn't be out here alone." Sarah felt a surge of pure, electric terror. His voice didn't sound like a professional officer. It sounded jagged. It sounded excited. She looked down at his chest. There was no name tag. There was no badge. Just a cheap plastic pin that said security. And then she noticed his belt. He didn't have a holster for a gun. Instead, hanging from his side was a long, heavy roll of silver duct tape and a pair of industrial bolt cutters. Sarah didn't ask any questions. She didn't wait for him to speak again. She slammed the car into drive, floored the gas pedal, and screamed as her tires spat gravel all over the man's uniform. She didn't look back. She drove at 100 miles an hour, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, until she saw the bright neon lights of a truck stop 20 miles away. She ran inside, crying, and told the cashier to call the real police. When the state troopers arrived and searched the highway, they found something that made everyone's blood run cold. They found the black SUV parked in a hidden service road, 2 miles from where Sarah had been stopped. The vehicle was empty, but inside the back seat, they found several sets of handcuffs, a gallon of bleach, and a collection of women's cell phones that had been reported missing over the last 3 years. The man was never caught. He is still out there, somewhere on the thousands of miles of unlit highway, waiting for the next lonely set of headlights to pull over. We think the rules protect us. We think the uniform means safety. But on the devil's highway, the person behind the lights isn't there to help you. They are there to make sure you never reach your destination. When we return in Chapter 2, we will leave the car behind. We will check into a place that promises rest, but delivers a nightmare. The Desert Motel. Welcome back. We have seen what happens when the flashing lights in your rearview mirror belong to a predator. We have learned that the open highway is a hunting ground. But eventually, every driver gets tired. Every driver needs to pull over and sleep. We look for the glowing neon signs in the dark. We pay for a cheap room with a heavy lock on the door. We think that 4 walls and a deadbolt will keep the nightmares out. But what if the nightmare is already waiting inside? This is Chapter 2, The Desert Motel. Route 66 is a ghost of its former self. Long stretches of the historic highway have been bypassed by modern interstates, leaving behind a trail of abandoned gas stations and decaying motels in the middle of the Nevada desert. In the summer of 2021, a 30-year-old freelance photographer named Mark was driving across the country. He preferred the old back roads, looking for interesting abandoned places to photograph. By midnight, he was exhausted. He had been driving for 12 hours. The yellow line on the road was starting to blur. He knew he had to stop. He saw a flickering neon sign ahead. It was an old, single-story, L-shaped motel. Half the letters on the sign were burned out. There were only 2 other cars in the massive, cracked parking lot. Mark pulled in and went to the night window. The clerk was an older man who didn't say a single word. He just slid a physical metal key under the bulletproof glass. Room 12. At the very end of the dark corridor. Mark drove his car to the end of the building, parked right outside his room, and carried his heavy camera bag inside. The room smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. The carpet was stained, and the heavy floral curtains were drawn tight. It was exactly what you would expect for $40 a night. Mark didn't care. He double-locked the main door, fastened the security chain, and collapsed onto the stiff mattress without even taking his boots off. He was asleep in minutes. At 2:30 in the morning, Mark woke up. It wasn't a sudden noise that woke him. It was a slow, repetitive sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He lay perfectly still in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The sound was coming from the wall right next to his bed. He realized his room had an adjoining door, one of those cheap, thin wooden doors that connects two rooms together for large families. It was locked from his side with a simple brass thumb turn. The scratching sound was coming from the other side of that thin wooden door. It sounded like someone was dragging a fingernail slowly up and down the cheap wood. Mark held his breath. He slowly sat up on the bed. He didn't turn on the lamp. He didn't want whoever was in there to know he was awake. The scratching stopped. For a full minute, there was absolute silence. Just the hum of the ancient window air conditioner. Then, Mark heard a new sound. It was the faint, metallic squeak of floorboards. Someone was standing right on the other side of the adjoining door, shifting their weight. Mark quietly slid off the bed and crept toward the adjoining door. He crouched down and looked at the half-inch gap between the bottom of the door and the cheap carpet. The room next door was completely dark, but the faint orange glow from the parking lot lights outside spilled under the main door, providing just enough illumination. Through the gap under the adjoining door, Mark saw two bare feet. They were standing perfectly still, less than an inch away from the wood, and the toes were pointed directly at his room. Someone was standing in the dark, right on the other side of the thin door, listening to him breathe. Suddenly, the brass thumb turn lock on Mark's side of the door began to slowly, silently turn. Someone on the other side had a master key, or they had picked the lock. Mark panicked. He didn't scream. He threw his entire body weight against the adjoining door and grabbed the brass lock with both hands, twisting it back into the locked position. He held it there with all his strength. The person on the other side didn't bang on the door. They didn't yell. Instead, Mark felt a heavy, terrifying pressure pushing against the wood from the other side. A slow, steady force trying to push the door open. Mark braced his boots against the floor frame, sweating, terrified, holding the lock shut. And then a voice whispered through the thin wood, It was right next to his ear. The voice was completely calm. It said, "I know you are traveling alone." Open the door. Mark didn't say a word. He just kept pushing. The heavy pressure on the door suddenly vanished. Mark waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked down at the gap under the door. The bare feet were gone. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat on the edge of the bed, his heavy metal tripod gripped in his hands like a baseball bat, staring at the adjoining door until the sun came up. As soon as it was light outside, he grabbed his bags, threw them into his car, and peeled out of the parking lot. He drove straight to the local sheriff's office in the next town and reported the incident. When the deputies went to the motel to investigate, they found the clerk completely unaware. They checked room 13, the room next to Mark's. The room was completely empty. It didn't even have furniture. The motel had been using it as a storage closet for broken televisions and old mattresses for over 5 years. The main door to the parking lot was deadbolted from the inside, covered in layers of dust. There was no way for anyone to get into that room from the outside. Whoever had been standing behind that door, whispering in the dark, had been waiting in the walls of that motel for a very long time. We lock our doors to keep the monsters out, but on the long, forgotten highways of America, sometimes the lock is just a trap to keep you inside with them. When we return in Chapter 3, we will get back on the road. But this time, the terror will not come from a building. It will come from the public restrooms at a desolate highway rest stop. Welcome back. We have escaped the glowing red lights of a fake cruiser. We have survived the whispered threats behind a motel door. But the highway is thousands of miles long, and eventually the physical needs of the body take over. You need to stretch your legs. You need to splash cold water on your face to stay awake. You see a blue sign with a white picnic table icon. A rest area. It looks clean. It looks safe. It looks like a small island of civilization in the middle of a dark, empty ocean. But in the middle of the night, a rest area is just a box with no way out. This is Chapter 3, The Rest Stop Trap. Interstate 80 stretches across the flat, featureless plains of Nebraska. It is a straight, hypnotic line of asphalt that goes on for hundreds of miles. In the winter, the wind howls across the fields, shaking every car on the road. In December of 2020, a college student named Ryan was driving home for Christmas. It was 3:30 in the morning. He was struggling to keep his eyes open. He saw a sign for a rest area in 5 miles. He decided to pull over, use the restroom, and maybe sleep in his car for 20 minutes. The rest area was a low concrete building surrounded by a few dead trees. There were no other cars in the lot. Just a single, massive semi-truck parked far away in the dark corners of the truck parking zone. Its engine was idling, creating a low, rhythmic vibration that Ryan could feel in the ground. Ryan walked toward the concrete building. The air was freezing. The overhead lights in the parking lot were flickering, casting long, jerky shadows across the pavement. He pushed open the heavy steel door of the men's restroom. The room was brightly lit with harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. The floor was wet with melted snow and grime. Ryan walked to the last stall at the end of the room and closed the door. The silence inside the restroom was absolute, broken only by the steady drip of a leaky faucet. Drip, dot, drip, drip. Then Ryan heard a sound from the stall right next to him. It was a slow, heavy breathing. It sounded wet, like someone was struggling to catch their breath. Ryan stayed perfectly still. He looked down at the gap between the stall partition and the floor. He expected to see a pair of shoes, but the floor in the next stall was completely empty. Then he heard a soft, metallic clink. A hand slowly slid under the partition from the next stall. It wasn't a normal hand. It was covered in a thick, black industrial grease. The fingernails were long and broken. The hand moved slowly across the wet tile floor, searching until it touched the edge of Ryan's shoe. Ryan pulled his feet up onto the toilet seat, his heart racing. He didn't say a word. He was paralyzed with fear. The hand stayed there for a moment, its greasy fingers twitching on the floor where Ryan's foot had just been. Then it slowly retracted back under the partition. Ryan waited. He heard the person in the next stall stand up, but he didn't hear the stall door open. Instead, he heard a scratching sound against the top of the partition wall, right above his head. Someone was climbing over. Ryan didn't wait to see who it was. He threw open his stall door and sprinted toward the main exit. He grabbed the heavy steel handle of the restroom door and pulled. It didn't move. The door, which had swung open easily just moments ago, was now locked from the outside. Ryan panicked. He slammed his shoulder against the door, screaming for help. He looked back over his shoulder toward the stalls. Standing at the end of the hallway, near the sinks, was a man. He was wearing a heavy, stained mechanic's jumpsuit. His face was obscured by a thick, dark beard and a layer of black grease. In his right hand, he was holding a massive, heavy pipe wrench. The man didn't run. He just stood there, tilting his head to the side, watching Ryan struggle with the door. He started walking toward Ryan, dragging the heavy metal wrench across the tiled floor. Screech, screech. It wasn't a normal hand. It was covered in a thick, black industrial grease. The fingernails were long and broken. The hand moved slowly across the wet tile floor, searching until it touched the edge of Ryan's shoe. Ryan pulled his feet up onto the toilet seat, his heart racing. He didn't say a word. He was paralyzed with fear. The hand stayed there for a moment, its greasy fingers twitching on the floor where Ryan's foot had just been. Then, it slowly retracted back under the partition. Ryan waited. He heard the person in the next stall stand up, but he didn't hear the stall door open. Instead, he heard a scratching sound against the top of the partition wall, right above his head. Someone was climbing over. Ryan didn't wait to see who it was. He threw open his stall door and sprinted toward the main exit. He grabbed the heavy steel handle of the restroom door and pulled. It didn't move. The door, which had swung open easily just moments ago, was now locked from the outside. Ryan panicked. He slammed his shoulder against the door, screaming for help. He looked back over his shoulder toward the stalls. Standing at the end of the hallway, near the sinks, was a man. He was wearing a heavy, stained mechanic's jumpsuit. His face was obscured by a thick, dark beard and a layer of black grease. In his right hand, he was holding a massive, heavy pipe wrench. The man didn't run. He just stood there, tilting his head to the side, watching Ryan struggle with the door. He started walking toward Ryan, dragging the heavy metal wrench across the tiled floor. Screech, screech, screech. The sound was deafening in the small concrete room. Ryan looked around frantically. He saw a small, high window above the sinks. It was barely wide enough for a person to fit through. He jumped onto the counter, smashed the glass with his elbow, and scrambled through the jagged opening, falling onto the frozen grass outside. He didn't look back. He ran to his car, fumbled with his keys, and floored the gas pedal. As he sped out of the parking lot, he looked in his rearview mirror. The man in the greasy jumpsuit was standing under one of the flickering parking lot lights. He wasn't chasing the car. He was just standing there, waving a slow, rhythmic goodbye with his greasy hand. Ryan drove for 50 miles until he found a gas station with people. He called the police. When the authorities arrived at the rest area, the building was empty. The restroom door was unlocked. There was no sign of the man. But when they checked the trash can inside the restroom, they found a small, battery-operated baby monitor. It had been taped to the underside of the sink. Someone had been listening to every sound Ryan made from the moment he stepped out of his car. Rest areas are designed for convenience. They are places to take a break from the road. But on the Devil's Highway, a rest area isn't a place to relax. It is a place where you are most vulnerable. It is a place where the walls are thick, the doors can be locked, and no one can hear you scream over the sound of the passing trucks. When we return for our fourth and final chapter, we will reach the end of the road. We will explore the terrifying legend of the hitchhiker's secret, the story of why you should never, under any circumstances, stop for a stranger in the rain. Welcome to our fourth and final chapter. Over the past 50 minutes, We have looked at the monsters who hide behind a badge. We have felt the cold pressure of a motel room door, and we have stared into the greasy eyes of a predator at a highway rest stop. But there is one final rule of the road, a rule that our parents and grandparents told us since the day we got our licenses. Never, under any circumstances, stop for a stranger in the rain. This is Chapter 4, The Hitchhiker's Secret. The Pacific Northwest is known for its constant gray drizzle and its thick, impenetrable forests. The highways there are narrow, winding, and often shrouded in a thick mountain fog that makes it impossible to see more than 10 feet in front of your car. In October of 2023, a 32-year-old nurse named Alina was driving home after a double shift at the hospital. It was nearly 4 in the morning. The rain was slamming against her windshield in heavy, rhythmic sheets. As she rounded a sharp curve on a remote stretch of Highway 101, her headlights caught a flash of white. Standing on the narrow shoulder, soaked to the bone, was a woman. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing a light summer dress that was completely inappropriate for the freezing October rain. She wasn't waving for help. She was just standing there, her head bowed, staring at the wet asphalt. Alina was a nurse. Her first instinct was to help. She slowed her car and pulled over. The woman walked to the passenger side door. Alina unlocked it, and the woman slid into the seat. A wave of cold, damp air filled the car. The woman didn't say thank you. She didn't even look at Alina. She just stared straight ahead through the windshield. Alina asked, "Are you okay? Where are you going? Do you need a hospital?" The woman whispered, just loud enough to be heard over the rain. "Just drive Dot to the bridge." Alina felt a strange, heavy tension in the car. The woman smelled like old leaves and copper. Her skin was so pale, it looked blue in the dashboard lights. They drove in silence for 10 miles. The woman didn't move a single muscle. She didn't blink. As they approached a large, rusted steel bridge crossing a deep river gorge, the woman finally spoke again. "Stop here," she whispered. Alina pulled over onto the bridge. The river below was a churning, black mass of white water. The woman opened the door and stepped out into the pouring rain. But before she closed the door, she leaned back into the car. For the first time, she looked Alina directly in the eyes. Her eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils. Just 2 bottomless pits of shadow. The woman said, "You have a kind heart, Alina. That is why I am leaving you a secret. Look in your back seat." Then she slammed the door and vanished into the fog. Elena's heart was hammering. She looked in her rearview mirror. The bridge behind her was completely empty. The woman was gone. Alina slowly turned around and looked into her back seat. Sitting on the floor mat, right behind the driver's seat, was a small, leather satchel. It was old and covered in mud. Alina reached back and opened it. Inside the bag was a collection of high-quality photographs. Every single one of them was a picture of Alina, but they weren't pictures from her social media. They were pictures of her sleeping in her bed, pictures of her drinking coffee in her kitchen, pictures of her walking into the hospital for her shift. And at the very bottom of the bag was a small, handwritten note. It said, "I wasn't the one waiting for you tonight. I'm just the one who got to you first." Check your trunk. Alina didn't breathe. She didn't scream. She threw the car into drive and floored it. She didn't stop until she reached a brightly lit police station in the next town. When the officers opened her trunk, they found that the lock had been professionally picked from the inside. Tucked into the spare tire well was a man. He was dressed in black, holding a sedative-soaked rag and a hunting knife. He had been hiding in her car since she left the hospital. He had been waiting for her to get home. The woman Alina picked up on the road that night. She wasn't a hitchhiker. She was something else. A warning. A ghost of the highway who had saved Alina from a much more human monster. Over the last hour, we have traveled the 1,000 miles of the Devil's Highway. We have seen that the road is a place of freedom, but it is also a place of absolute vulnerability. Whether it is the fake officer in the desert, the whisperer behind the motel door, the grease-covered mechanic in the rest stop, or the stalker in your own trunk, the highway is never truly empty. These stories are a reminder that when you are alone on the asphalt, you are at the mercy of the night. Thank you for surviving this 1-hour journey into the terrifying reality of the road. If you made it to the very end of this documentary, leave a comment down below and tell me which of these 4 true stories made you never want to take a road trip again. If you want to hear more deep dives into the dark, the unsolved, and the unknown, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell and give this video a like. Stay safe, never ignore your instincts, and I will see you in the next nightmare.